So I've ruined everything.
You've shown me I've been living in a dream. And it's time to return to real life.
When a show has been around as long as Downton Abbey has, it's almost impossible to think of it ever really ending. And yet, with Downton Abbey, the grand finale, that's exactly what the creators promised fans. A big, emotional farewell that ties everything together. But the funny thing about television and film franchises these days is that no story ever feels completely finished. Because even when you get what feels like the perfect conclusion, it doesn't take long before people start asking what comes next. So even though this movie was marketed as the end, there's already chatter about a potential prequel, a reboot, and maybe, just maybe, even a season 7. And the way the finale played out honestly leaves a bunch of doors open for exactly that. The film came out on September 12th, and right from the beginning, it had that air of finality. Elizabeth McGovern, who has been at the heart of the series as Cora Crawley, Countess of Grantham, openly said this was the end of the road for her. She even teased that if the story ever continued, it would probably have to be through a prequel with younger versions of the characters we know and love. That's an interesting idea, because with Maggie Smith's Dowager Countess gone, the idea of seeing young Violet could bring a whole new dimension to the story. Still, even though she insisted it's the last, longtime fans know better than to take that at face value. Because when you've got a franchise as beloved and financially successful as Downton Abbey, the temptation to keep it alive is always there. The grand finale itself was designed to pull hard on emotions, and it did exactly that. Part of the emotional weight came from the fact that the cast and crew were reuniting after so many years, which Michelle Dockery even described as a beautiful tribute to Maggie Smith. So when you watch it, you're not just saying goodbye to a fictional family, you're also saying goodbye to the actors' shared history, and that makes every scene land harder. But at the same time, endings like these are never just about looking back. They're also about leaving breadcrumbs for what the future might hold. And that's where things get interesting. Now, let's talk about how this final film really wrapped up. On paper, it closed things out neatly. Lady Mary ends up fully in charge of Downton Abbey after her father steps aside, even though she's divorced and high society looks down on her for it. That's huge, because it sets up a storyline where Mary could represent a more modern, independent kind of leadership, something we haven't seen much of in the franchise before. It's almost like a setup for a fresh new chapter, even though they called it the end. And the film doesn't stop there. It reminds fans of everything that came before in a way that makes it hard not to think about what could come after. For example, the ending shows Mary alone in the hall, only for the story to then bring back the ghosts of Matthew, Sybil, and Violet. They appear in this dreamlike sequence, almost as if to say the past is never really gone. That's both a tribute to longtime fans and a clever way of keeping the door open, because when you're reminded of how important these characters were, you also start wondering about what their children might do, or how their legacy could play out in a new generation. Personally, I think that's the real genius of the finale. On the surface, it's giving closure, but beneath that, it's planting seeds for a potential season 7 or even beyond. Think about it. Mary is now fully in charge, her kids are growing up, Edith and Herbert are still in play, and we've got younger characters like Daisy stepping into leadership roles. That's not an ending, that's a setup. It's like the baton has been passed and now we're just waiting for someone to pick it up. And let's not forget the actual drama in this movie. Mary's divorce from Henry left her in a scandalous position, and society turned its back on her. Then, her uncle Harold comes in with his money problems, dragging the family into yet another financial crisis. Add to that the con artist Gus, who briefly connected with Mary before revealing his true colors, and you've got enough conflict to fuel another full season. Because although Mary dealt with him and Edith shut him down, that storyline clearly shows that Downton's future isn't stable. There are cracks in the foundation, literally and figuratively, and that's prime material for more episodes. Another big part of the finale was Isabel taking charge of the town fair with Daisy by her side. That whole subplot wasn't just about a fair, it was about showing how the younger generation is ready to step up. Daisy, once a maid, is now a head cook and respected in her own right, even though the board resisted her involvement at first. Isabel insisted she stay, and the fair's success proved that the future of Downton and the surrounding community might look very different than its past. That's another example of the story quietly paving the way for new blood. And speaking of new blood, if there were to be a Season 7, introducing fresh characters would be the natural next step. Because while the original cast will always be loved, the franchise can't survive forever on nostalgia. The idea of Mary's children, George and Caroline, starting to grow into young adults could open up brand new storylines. Imagine George stepping into his father Matthew's shadow, or Caroline trying to navigate society while her mother is branded a scandalous divorcee. And then there's Anna's unborn child. Naming Mary as godmother wasn't just sentimental, it was symbolic. That child could represent a literal new generation of stories. Even though the movie kept insisting it was the end, producer Gareth Nemi admitted he might change his mind. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. Downton Abbey has been a global success with 6 TV seasons, holiday specials, and now 3 movies. That's a bunch of storytelling already, but it still feels like there's gas left in the tank. Because as long as fans care about what happens to this family and this estate, there's a reason to keep going. What's really interesting is the talk of a prequel. McGovern mentioned the idea of a young Maggie and exploring Violet's younger years. That could absolutely work, because the Dowager Countess has always been the heart of the show, and learning how she became the sharp, witty, and resilient woman we know would add depth to everything we've already seen. But a prequel doesn't have to be the only option. A Season 7 could happen right where the finale left off, and a prequel could run alongside it, exploring the roots of the Crawley legacy. At the end of the day, the finale really functions as both an ending and a new beginning. It gave us closure by showing Mary reflect on her past with Matthew and Sybil, but it also gave us possibilities by establishing her as the leader of Downton Abbey moving forward. It's like Julian Fellowes wanted to honor the past while quietly nudging the story toward the future. And fans, who have spent 15 years with these characters, are more than ready for that future. So, while the grand finale might have been marketed as goodbye, it doesn't feel like one. It feels like the closing of a chapter, not the whole book. With new challenges, younger characters ready to step into the spotlight, and even the potential for completely new cast members, Season 7 is not just possible, it feels almost inevitable. Because when a story resonates this deeply with audiences, it never really ends, it just changes form. And maybe that's the real lesson of Downton Abbey. Family stories never finish, they evolve, they grow, and they get passed down. So if you ask me, the grand finale wasn't the end at all. It was the perfect setup for whatever comes next. Whether that's a prequel, a reboot, or a full-on Season 7, one thing's for sure, Downton Abbey still has a bunch of stories left to tell. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay in the loop. And if you want, you can share your thoughts about this video in the comments.